Good afternoon viewers and welcome to the EduSat lecture for the science stream. Today we have with us Dr. Ashish Nandi, who is a professor at the School of Life Sciences at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has been giving several lectures on plant biochemistry, and today also he will start a series on the plant hormone biochemistry. He will be discussing about the various hormones and will also discuss about the differences between the plant and animal hormones and what are the similarities. We are all aware of hormones being important for any human's growth, development, emotional response, and similarly we like to see how do these hormones affect the growth of a plant. So, over to Dr. Ashish Nandi.
Thank you very much. As you said that we will be discussing about plant hormones today, and in fact plant hormones play a very important role in many aspects of plants growth, development, in every aspects including seed setting, germination, leaf development, response to pathogens, response to insects. In fact, every aspects of a life of a plant is largely regulated by different types of hormones. So, today I begin a series of classes which may take about 5 to 6 classes altogether to speak about different types of plant hormones are there. I will speak about their discoveries, I will speak about their roles, what they play in plant development or plant's life. I will speak about their signal transduction, the basic mechanism how signal is transduced and what is the effect of that signal transduction. And today I will also I want to acknowledge at the very beginning about a teaching tool that is available in the Plant Cell Journal website. So, if you go to the Plant Cell Journal website, which is www.plantcell.org, you get a link which is called teaching tools. So, I want to have a special acknowledgement on that because many of my slides or information I have taken from that particular website. And so, let me begin today about the plant hormones. So, as basically you know about hormones, when you speak about, you have probably heard about endocrine hormones. The endocrine words or is mainly used to indicate a group of molecules, small molecules, which are secreted in certain part of cells, certain type of cells, and then they are transported to somewhere else for their function. So, these are largely called endocrine hormones. And in plant, this is not the case, even though there are many plant hormones which play very similar role like that of in the animal, but they are actually not in a true sense endocrine. So, there are certain differences, certain similarities, and let me I will talk about it. So, these hormones are, people have understood the hormones as early as in 1800s, and very early 1900 onwards many hormones experimentally have been demonstrated their transport and their biosynthesis, place of biosynthesis at least. Specifically if I talk about auxins, and ethylene also came out very early in 1900. So, we will speak about that. Now, to begin with, I will show you one slide that has a picture of Fritz Wendt and Kenneth Themen. So, you can see these pictures in the left side is first Wendt and then Kenneth Themen. These two gentlemen probably first coined the term phytohormones. The word phytohormones here define hormones of plants, but which are not endocrine hormones. So, very much like hormones, they are characterized by the property of serving as chemical messengers, and by which the certain organ of an organism help or coordinate with the other organs, and that is how the first phytohormones were termed. And there is actually, this book was published in 1937. So, quite much later than lot of knowledge on hormone came up, but the main reason actually why the phytohormone terms were coined, because they are not purely as endocrine. So, this is the one of the main difference. So, one of the difference actually is that, like when you talk about a hormone, it is a substance which being produced in any one part of the organism is transferred to another part, and there influences a specific physiological process. But in contrast, if you see the plant hormones, most of the plant cells are capable of making the hormones. This is not like concept of endocrine, where only a few cells can make it. So, and it is not, it is, you can say it is autocrine like. And say some of the students who may not be aware about three terms, which is called endocrine, paracrine and autocrine. The endocrine means the hormones which are synthesized in one organ and then get transported to the distal organ. And the paracrine and the autocrine, they are not true hormones. Quite often they are the large molecules or the signaling molecules. Like the paracrines are normally used for a short range communications. So, it is secreted by one cell, and then the neighbor cell has a receptor, the neighbor cell recognize that and can activate a signaling response. So, that is what we call as paracrine. And the autocrines are made inside the cell and then can work on that particular cell. So, they are called autocrines. So, if you want to say a plant hormone which may be an autocrine or paracrine, but if you look at the chemical natures, the way they function, they are more like of an endocrine hormones. The many reasons are that they are very small molecules, small chemicals, easily diffusible inside the cell, and they are made, the actually what happened, the plant basically are totipotent in many respects. One of the aspect is that every cell can have their all metabolisms done. So, every plant cell is capable of making all type of hormones, and they can diffuse within the cells rapidly, can do many functions. The another similarity between plant and animal hormone is that both of the cases it mostly affect the transcription process. So, be it from the outside like an endocrine, or be it in a plant which is made inside, both of them mostly affect the process of transcription with the help of a series, a few small steps where involved in between, which may or may not have a MAP kinase signaling in between, or it can have a direct transcription factor activator. Most of the plant hormones have a role in directly activating on transcription factor and thereby regulating transcription, which is also true for all the almost all animal hormones, like all steroid hormones. So, this way there are many similars. So, this is what actually basically are the difference between plant and animal hormones, and now we will speak about what are those animal, what are these hormones do and what are they do it. Okay. And another thing what also I should tell you about the plant and animal hormone is that none of them are used as a nutrient. In the other words, the hormones are usually made in a picogram level, very minute content, and their main function is to induce the signaling. So, they are not used as a nutrient directly, and second thing is that they are also not enzyme. So, they do not have the enzyme activity by themselves. So, this is a very small amount of chemical substances, they are made in the cell, they activate a transcription factor and which in turn can activate transcription of large number of genes and which may eventually have effect on many aspects. like development and growth, reproduction, sexual differentiation, maintenance of the internal environment, regulation of metabolism and nutrient. Okay. So, now coming to the plant hormone, classically there are 5 plant hormones which have been described in as early as in within 1930 1940. So, they are called classical plant hormones. There are 5 classical plant hormones like auxin. Auxin was demonstrated in 1800s and isolated in 1926. Cytokinin 1950s. Ethylene was purified much early in 1901. Gibberellin similar to like auxin, very at the almost same time. Abscisic acid in 1950s. So, within 1950s these 5 classical plant hormones were biochemically identified. And so, today what I will do is actually I will talk mostly about auxins, but if you look into the today's literature which I am talking at 215, you will find besides those 5 classical ones, there are quite a few more have been identified like brasinosteroid, salicylate, strigalactone and jesmonate. So, now these 5 classicals are shown in the top: auxins, cytokinin, gibberellins, ABA, ethylene, and 4 which have come up quite recently in that respect is brasinosteroid, salicylate, strigalactone and jesmonate. So, if you look, all of them have a very small these are small organic molecules, and the ones which came late also are very important for development, stress response and all. So, most of them like brasinosteroids, salicylate, jesmonate, even strigalactone, they are mostly recruited for stress responses in addition to their role in development. So, I will speak about them in the subsequent classes. So, let us learn about what the phytohormones do, and if you look at this slide you will see a life cycle of a plant. Here you can begin from anywhere, but let us begin from a fruit ripening. There are hormones which influence fruit ripening, and there are hormones which influence embryogenesis and seed dormancy. Seed dormancy breaking is germination, you have hormones playing role in that, growth, shoot branching, flower development, fertilization and fruit formation, and eventually getting a whole plant. So, this is the life cycle, and each and every step of this life cycle is controlled by many different plant hormones. In addition to that normal life cycles, also each and every of these steps are also challenged by many different kind of stresses. There can be biotic stresses like pathogen, insects, or there can be abiotic stresses such as drought, salinity and so on. And hormones play roles throughout this life cycle to manage the stress, or which is called also stress response. So, these are the 5 classical plant hormones, mostly how they play role is listed over here. You see hormonal control of vegetative development, the most important player is auxin and cytokinin. Besides that you have strigalactone, gibberellins and brasinosteroid. Reproduction is mostly controlled by ethylene and abscisic acid. Hormonal response to stress is mostly salicylate and jesmonate. And one thing one must understand is that none of these hormones work in isolation. They have always interaction among each other. So, in a living plant, none of the hormones are working in isolation as of alone. Like for example, only cytokinin cannot function unless auxin is there, or only ethylene cannot work in alone without having interference from the other signaling molecules like that of arising from cytokinin or auxins. So, every signaling molecules, every hormone signaling pathways are highly interacting, and the actual output in terms of the development response is an output of the interaction among multiple plant hormones. So, today we will speak about mostly, as I said, auxin, and I will speak about role of auxins in plant, what it do, what it does, its discovery, and probably if I get time I will speak about biosynthesis, transport and signaling. So, let me begin with auxins, whatever the role it does. If you look into the slides, I have summarized what are the different areas where auxin influence on plant. Here I have written down number 11 and it can be much more, like leaf development on SAM. SAM is shoot apical meristem. Each and every leaf comes out from a group of meristem which is called as shoot apical meristem. Auxin play very important role in determining where a leaf should come out in the shoot apical meristem. So, I will show you today that why auxin is required for determining a position where leaf will come up. In fact, if auxin is not there, then leaf do not come out from shoot apical meristem. It is very important. Second thing is also very important is polarity development. See, polarity I have spoken sometimes back in development course is that polarity means one side is different from the other. Like if I talk about myself, my head is upwards and my feet is in the downwards. So, that is a polarity. One end is different from another end. So, this polarity can be at the organismal level, can be at an organ level, can be in a tissue level, and even can be in a given cell. And very importantly, auxin play the most important role in determining polarity. Often has been shown that the mutants which are impaired in auxin, maybe biosynthesis or signaling, have a defective polarity. I will show you again something today. The third important factor of auxin role is apical dominance, that again probably you have read it in the school level books. Like if you let a plant grow undisturbed, you will see the only tip part goes very happily until at least until to a certain time period, which is called as apical dominance. And often if you break the shoot tip and then the side branching come out, essentially it is called a breaking of apical dominance. Auxin plays very important role in maintaining the apical dominance of a plant, and often has been shown that if you break up, if you just remove the tip part, then side branching promotes. That also experimentally has been shown by artificial auxin application experiments. Third thing, which is again very important for auxin, is root development. So, again some of you probably may know that root development requires auxin. So, that one I think I told you in one of the developmental biology course lecture is from an embryo there are two poles made. One pole makes shoot and the other pole make root, and in the embryo itself the root pole gets quite a high amount of auxin in compared to the shoot pole. So, it is believed, or not only believed, it is experimentally has been shown that low concentration of auxin is required for developing shoot apical meristem in the embryo, and similarly high amount of oxygen is required for root apical meristem or ram development in an embryo. So, it is very important. In addition to that, root branching, like shoot branching is promoted in when oxygen is low. Similarly, root branching is promoted when oxygen is high. So, oxygen promotes root branching. There are many such phases of life where it is controlled. Like I must also tell you, the most well known probably to all of you is the tropical movement of plants. There are two kind of tropic movement, one we call as a phototropism and another is geotropism. Phototropism means bending of plants or its parts towards light, and geotropism is bending of a plant or of its organ either towards the gravity, earth's gravity, or against the earth's gravity. So, these are called geotropism, and it has been proven quite well that oxygen play important role in both phototropism and geotropism. So, this phototropism in also called in other way as light response. So, the growth of light in response to growth of plant in response to light is also controlled by oxygens. Besides that, oxygen also play very important role in vascular development. It plays a role in response to plants nutrient redistribution, nutrient relocation in the plant. It regulates nodule development in a plant, and also it is not required, I would say, but definitely influences the way a plant would interact with the pathogens. So, in many different aspects this plant hormone oxygen play role. Okay. So, now I will show you one or two slides by which I will show you that how oxygen is so important in making the leaf development. So, here you can see two pictures, one in the left and one in the right. For your understanding, let me explain to you that this is a photograph taken with large magnification of a shoot apical meristem. This is a scanning electron micrograph, and this will be only few millimeter long, but it has been magnified through the electron microscope. What you can visualize here is the leaves. So, this is this area is shoot apical meristem, and you have leaves are coming up as this is a small leaf and this is comparatively bigger leaf, and the background is still bigger leaf, which is a background of this photo. Now, if you look at a mutant here in the right side, this mutant has a shoot apical meristem. This is the shoot apical meristem of a mutant. This mutant is called PIN1 mutant, and this mutant has a defect in oxygen transport. There is not as such a problem in oxygen biosynthesis or signaling, but has a problem in oxygen transport. So, it cannot transport the oxygen, and what you will see here in this case, no leaf has formed, and since it has no leaf and it looks like a pin head, this mutant is called pin mutant or PIN1. So, that tells you how oxygen is important for making a leaf. If you do not have oxygen metabolism properly, then leaf do not develop. I will show you a few more experiments carried out on the pin mutant. Here the left picture is the pin mutant that I showed you a few minutes back. Now, if you look at the right side, you have a pin mutant. Here you just look at this red color small blob. This red blob is a glue which is soaked with oxygen, and this glue is stuck on the wall of the pin SAM, shoot apical meristem. Now you can see it is no longer smooth like in the left, but there is a growth in the one side. You can see it is not uniform anymore and it is trying to grow, which otherwise indicate that if you provide artificially little extra oxygen in one side, it may induce a leaf formation. In fact, if you allow it to grow for few more days, like here this slide you can see, this was the picture I showed you, which was 38 hours after oxygen application, and if you grow it for another 4 days, you should be able to see that almost a leaf like structure coming up on the pin mutant background. So, this experiment tells you that oxygen is necessary and as well as sufficient for inducing leaf on shoot apical meristem. I will show you a picture also from a monocot plant. The earlier one was an Arabidopsis, that was a dicot plant. In monocot, grass family monocot like maize, rice, wheat, their leaf development starts by a group of cell which is called founder cells. So, this is a shoot apical meristem and a group of cells in the side called founder cells that grow and make a leaf petiole first, and then petiole eventually grow big and make one leaf. This is an experiment which is another very interesting experiment on maize plant. On the top plant you can see a maize shoot apical meristem. The very center where the mouse is placed is the shoot apical meristem, and there are many leaves are shown in the sides which are also numbered, and in this picture you can see up to 8 leaves. Now, the experiment was carried out is that one applied one inhibitor. So, that is called naphthalamic acid, naphthalinic acid, and that is called NPA. This NPA is an inhibitor for oxygen transport, and if you apply this NPA, it may behave like a pin mutant, because the other one is a genetically making defective in oxygen transport. Here it is by a pharmacological application you are making impaired oxygen transport. Now, you can see here the photograph in the down. After the 4th leaf was made, NPA was applied. Now, what you can see, after the NPA was applied, then no more leaves have formed. Now, you see this SAM is much bigger, growth is not stopped, SAM is becoming bigger and bigger. Look at the SAM size in the top and look at the SAM size in the down. Shoot apical meristem or the SAM is getting bigger, growth is not arrested, but only thing is that making leaf is arrested. So, oxygen is very important for making leaves on shoot apical meristem. So, second thing what I told you about the oxygen in polarity. So, this is I will not go through with all of them because it would really take up time, but these two I will show you before I begin the discover another thing, leaf polarity. So, again I will show you the one slide where one plant is shown, and this is the normal polarity of a plant where leaves are upwards, root in the down. It is very clearly wherever you go you can see the plants like this. And now, you can have a mutant here, this is a mutant of oxygen signaling mutant, and here root is there in both the ends. So, this is actual or basal root which is normally taking place, and the upper part instead of making a shoot, this is also making a root. So, this mutant is a mutant of oxygen signaling. I will tell you in details maybe in the next class, and this is a mutation called topless. So, this is called TPL1. So, what I have told you so far is oxygen is very important for leaf initiation on shoot apical meristem, and also polarity of a plant polarity. So, the third response which I really wanted to talk is the light response, and I will talk about the light response because of the light response auxins was identified. Auxins were discovered because of its role in light response, and the light response which I am talking about today is phototropism. Like as any of you must have seen, if you have a plant which is getting one side sunlight more than the other side, plant bend towards where you have more light. So, this is what is the called phototropism, and phototropism was the experiment through which auxin was identified. So, that will be very interesting to see how a simple experiments led to a big identification of a big science by using phototropism. So, I will show you some of the slides here. Here in the left side you can see a coleoptile of a grass family plant. The grass in the right side you can see this is a grass plant called canary grass. The canary grass was the first plant which was used to identify auxin, and the grass family plant like rice, as I told you a few minutes back, wheat, maize, when they germinate they forms a structure is called coleoptile. This coleoptile is seen over here. This coleoptile is a hard cover inside of which you have new leaves come up. So, a few first leaves like 2-3 first leaves are covered with a thick cover which is called as coleoptile, and this coleoptile is the one which bends towards the light immediately after germination, which is shown in the left. And look at this experiment which was carried out in 1890 by no other than the great Darwin. So, what the experiment was, they have a canary coleoptile, and it is a very simple experiment that if you have a light in one side, then canary coleoptile bends towards the light. It is a very simple observation that the light can dictate the growth of the coleoptile, and Darwin and many others actually studied about that. This is a paper, this is a book of Darwin which is written as The Power of Movement in Plants, and it was published in 1881. How the plants can move with the dictated by the light. Now, look at this simple experiment. You see in the left, this is a normal coleoptile. This coleoptile can bend if light is falling in one side, it will bend towards light. Now, the simple experiments are like if the tip is cut as is shown here, the tip part is cut, or the tip is covered with something which does not allow the light to fall. What is shown here, these two cases they do not respond to the light or there is no phototropism. So, this is very early experiments in 1800s where people have shown that just by covering the coleoptile tip or by cutting the coleoptile tip, phototropism can be inhibited. And then the thought process came, and that is why the big thinkers are required. So, what he observed is that the bending is much down, bending takes place in this area, but light requires in this area. So, there is a big difference where light is perceived and where effect is seen. So, in this case what you can see, auxin or the light in terms of auxin will come later, they did not know it was auxin, but what is seen that light is affecting in one part and the influence is coming into another part of the plant. And then quite a few systematic study was followed, like here you can see one study by Boyson and Jensen in 1913. What they did is they took a series of coleoptiles. In one coleoptile, this was cut and separated by a block which will not allow the direct contact. You can assume an impermeable block. And then second experiment, this was placed with a butter. So, a block of butter was placed after cutting the coleoptile. In this experiment, after cutting the coleoptile, a gelatin block is placed, and the third one is left uncut as it was before. And then the inner part was covered with black, and the top part, which is above this surgical experimental place, light was exposed. So, light is not received by the lower part, light is received by the upper parts only, which was either physically separated by an impermeable block or by a butter or by a gelatin or by nothing, and then light was given. What was noticed is that this one which was not cut is bent, the one which is a gelatin block was bent, but not the one which was impermeable or not the one which is butter. So, very simple experiment here, they concluded that tip is making something and tip, that something is passing via and going down for making bending here, which is covered by the light, and that molecule cannot pass through butter or cannot pass through a hydrophobic molecule. It is must be water soluble hydrophilic which can pass it through, it cannot pass it through a hydrophobic molecule. Okay. The experiments continued by many more scientists. This was a scientist by Paul in 1919, 6 years later. What the experiments are again very simple, very similar one. What he did here is they had a control petiole. In one case petiole was removed, and then in other two cases petiole was removed, placed back in the same place. In the fourth one, the tip is removed and placed in one side. So, this is something like this. Again, this does not have the tip part. Here tip is present, but not in proper place, in uniform place, and this setup was put in a condition where light was uniformly present. In this case, light was not placed in one side, here light was placed uniformly throughout. So, when light was placed uniformly throughout, you do not anticipate bending of the coleoptile, and this is what exactly happened after a few days. What you can see here, this one do not bend because light is uniform. Similarly, this one where tip is cut, and even this one where tip is placed in the right place. But interestingly over here, what they have shown, the asymmetric tip placement cause bending. In other words, you can say just by asymmetric placing one tip can work as if there is a light is falling from one side, and in this experiment actually light was uniform. So, the conclusion was from this experiment is that there must be differential amount in two different sides of the coleoptile. When it is present in one side, it will allow it to bend, and these are the experiments which were done many quite early in discovery of auxins, which led eventually discovery of auxins. So, this is the paper which came in 1930s, where Wendt was the first author and where auxin was purified. So, now this auxin purification step was very similar as I told you. What they did is they took large number of coleoptile and they cut the tips, and tips were placed on agar blocks. Now, you see there are agar blocks, on the top of the agar blocks there are tips, and those tips eventually will secrete out auxins over here, and this agar block now was, if you put a agar block in this, that can lead to a bending. So, eventually you can see now you do not need the coleoptile. You have a agar block collects the molecules which come from the tip, and now we placed only agar block, and that agar block can make it bending. So, whatever the molecules which were made in the coleoptile tip was collected in the agar block, and that is the experiment which allowed to identify biochemically what is auxins. So, the amount which the molecule which was present was identified by many different techniques which may include mass spectrometry, and that allowed the identification of functional auxins is indole 3 acetic acid, and that is how the auxin was discovered. And then has been quite many experiments was done in early 1980s which showed auxin can do marvelous jobs. Here is one experiment where has been shown that if you take grapevines and if you apply auxins, then there is a lot more number of roots in the grapevines. This is also 1930s experiment. And here is one experiment where you have a Daucus carota, the carrot roots, and what has no, it is the radish root. In the radish root, if you apply exogenous auxin, then you can have many more extra roots. So, application of extra auxin can induce extra roots in these plants. See, I told you about auxin's role in apical dominance. Like this experiment which is shown here is also a very good example is how auxins can affect apical dominance. Like what the experiments was done in early 1930s is you take a small plant and then cut the tip. What you will find, once the tip is removed, then the plant will have many more branching. Now, suppose you take a plant, cut the tip, and on the tip you put a small agar block. This agar block may or may not contain auxin. What has been shown is that if you cut a plant on the top, if you place a agar block without auxin, then it does not inhibit apical dominance, or in other words, there is a lot of branching, because now the auxin producing main shoot apical meristem has been removed. However, if you replace with another agar block which is soaked with auxin, in that cut end you will find the inhibit the side branching, or in other words, that is also proved that auxin can directly inhibit shoot branching in plants. So, these are the many experiments which I have told you. Now, look at this particular slide, that is quite interesting again. See, auxin is a hormone that do many jobs. I told you, as I told you, it affects shoot development, affects leaf development, affects root polarity, induce roots, and many things. But interestingly, in a given plant, in a same plant, this effect is a concentration dependent event. In this figure, the auxin concentration is in an increasing manner. So, starting from 10 to the power minus 11 molar to 10 to the power minus 1 molar, and this is the response. So, this is a positive response, this is a negative response. What has been shown that very low concentration of auxins can easily promote root development. Now, more you have the auxins, then root development actually inhibits very high amount of root auxin. Bud formation, this is the graph, and then stem development. So, the effect on a given plant, what the auxin is going to do is depends on what is the actual physiological conditions or concentration which is present in the plant. Okay. So, another experiment I will tell you about is the polar transport. See, if you recall the experiments that I told you, this experiment is also a similar one. What you can see here, a coleoptile. This coleoptile, the tip part has been removed and was placed on a agar block. So, this is the agar block where the auxin has been collected, and now a small stem fragment is cut out. What has been done is that you take the stem and put the agar block on the top and see how much agar is collected in the down. This assay is very easy because you can take this agar block, put on another coleoptile and see how it responds. So, if the coleoptile which collected agar, that will show the response, and you will know then the auxin must have transported through the stem. Okay. Now, what has been done is that this tiny stem has been kept by inverting it out. So, you can see here this experiment has been done is the same block, but coleoptile is inverted. So, this stem part is shown, and what has been shown is when the segment is inverted, it is unable to transport auxin from base to tip. So, the auxin can move, but this is not necessarily moving from the up to down, it is not moving via the gravity of earth, it is moving via a mechanism which allows it to move in a particular direction. So, auxin transport is a directional transport, you cannot have a random transport in anywhere you want it. So, there are this is very important aspects. I will tell you quite details in the maybe possibly next class, that what are the different ways auxin can transport from one cell to another. But this simple experiment which I described to you can tell you that it is not something that can really travel randomly from any direction to any other direction. So, this is the last slide maybe I will tell you today among us, and then I will have a discussion, is that what these classical studies told us. This is the quite a few classical experiments I have explained to you today. The classical, from these classical studies we understood what is the chemical structure of auxin. It was very simple experiments led to the identification of auxin. And second thing is that auxin can promote root formation and can inhibit bud outgrowth. So, the apical dominance is the same thing what I am talking about, inhibiting bud outgrowth. The auxin moves through the shoot from the tip to base, and again this tip to base is not a direction of the gravity, it is the direction by which cells are aligned in from tip to base. And then different tissues have different sensitivities. As I told you, the root has a different sensitivity than a shoot, and what I also told you that the auxin effect is growth in a concentration and tissue specific manner. Okay. So, but if you look at this classical studies up to 1950s, lot of things we understood, but what we really did not understand, that quite many things, is that how really auxin promotes growth is one thing we really never understood by these classical experiments. And today in 2015 you will see many different tools have come up. So, for one example, today people have done the cell specific amount of the auxin. They have completed already. I will maybe in next class I will tell you what are the different ways now people can measure the amount of auxin. And there are many reporters, like two reporters which are used, one is a Gus reporter, one is JP reporter. So, there are promoters very precisely induced when there is auxin, and one can look about the promoter activity and can tell what is the level of auxin. It is not only that, they have also made the complete auxin mapping of a root in Arabidopsis, like each and every cell has how much of auxin. So, those are the things has been done in late and say until next last quite a few years, and maybe I will tell you what the, and that also another thing which I also must tell you, the power of mutagenesis and development of a model plant like Arabidopsis. So, lot of mutants have been generated in Arabidopsis and other plants, and the mutants, from the mutants genes have been identified, signaling pathways have been identified, and now quite a great extent we know how auxins can promote shoot development, or how promote root development, promote leaf development, and so on. So now if you have any question, actually you can ask me.
Thank you, sir, for the lecture. I definitely have many questions. So if I can start with totipotency, when you said about totipotency and the capability of each cell to secrete these hormones, will that be a right term to secrete these hormones, because they are not endocrine, they are paracrine?
Actually, it's not secret, it's a synthesize is a better
Yes.
word. Actually, what happened, this is something interesting. Plants are totipotent, we say, but there is a dedicated function for each and every type of cells. Like what I will tell you, if required, a stem cell can do photosynthesis,
Yes.
but that is not his dedicated job. The dedicated job of a stem is maybe a support and to have a transport, whereas leaf mesophyll cells are dedicated for making like photosynthesis. But however, if required, a stem cell also can do photosynthesis. So there should be not be confused completely by the way totipotency and by the way they are normally functioning. Like each and every, like as you have seen in these slides, the coleoptile, the tip cells are only making auxins. The other cells are not making that much of auxin, because it is going via tip to base. So this contradicts my saying by totipotent, because only few cells are making, right?
Yes, but when we remove the tip, the other nodes can be induced to form auxins. They can also
That's right. So
synthesize auxin.
the axial buds now will make a new shoot apical meristem that will make the new another place where auxins can be made. So in that way, it's true that they are totipotent, but not that every cell make everything.
Yes.
So there is a dedicated function for each and every cell.
Sir, regarding the ratios of hormones you were talking about, that one hormone doesn't works in independence, in totality, it
Right.
needs the interference, or if I may say that there has to be a ratio balance between two hormones for either root or shoot generation. Also another thing I would like to ask here is, how do we determine that this much picogram level of auxin will cause root generation, because both these things are occurring simultaneously. The shoot is also growing and there is apical dominance because the shoot has to go upright, and roots are also simultaneously spreading. So how does this balance occur, and is it about the localized nature of action in these hormones?
Yeah, actually you have answered my question at the last words. This is the one which is a localized concentration. You see, there actually you cannot say exactly how much physiological exactly concentration is required. Most of the concentration which are determined are the quantitative or relative levels. That is true. Now when you talk about the interaction of multiple pathways, that always happens because in no time in a normal plant cell is devoid of other signaling. Some cells may have more auxin than the other, some cells have more cytokinin than the other, but no time they are completely devoid of any other. So naturally what happens is that there has to be an interaction and crosstalk. Even though today we might have not understood many things, but people have scientifically demonstrated how this interaction takes place. Like what happens when you make the mutant of two different signaling pathways and see what happens. Sometimes one signaling can be exaggerated in the presence of another one or in the absence of another one. So those kind of experiments can tell you how these two signaling really interact with each other and what the output may be of such interactions.
Such interactions.
Right.
Sir, again, when we are talking about interactions and when we are talking about plant growth, auxins, we clearly just say that they are related to plant growth, but we also understand that auxins are not, are they affecting mitosis in any ways, or what is the role of auxin to cytokinin in mitosis and in the polarity in which you will find the cell division is to occur and then cells have to align to that polarity?
Yeah, so that actually maybe I can explain much better after the next class.
Yes, sir.
Where I will talk about how really auxins work. As such, when I am talking about mitosis, cytokinin has a much bigger influence
roles
than the auxins. Auxins are proposed to influence a cell elongation. and membrane depolarization and a lot other things. So, as such a direct role of auxin is more limited to cell elongation than the cell divisions. Yes.
Sir, do the coleoptile in the monocots can be used as a source of auxin for a dicot plant?
Yes, because the biochemical nature of auxins made in a monocot and the dicots are no different. So, even there are many nowadays there are many chemical analogs are available.
Yes, sir.
So, they are not made by any plant dicot or monocot, but they are artificially synthesized, and that even equally work both in monocot and dicot. So, chemical nature is very similar.
Sir, there are other molecules such as diosgenin which are human steroid, which are similar to human steroids. So, these molecules also are plant hormones, or they are just secondary metabolites?
Secondary metabolites.
These are secondary metabolites.
They are not considered as a, hormones, because if you see as such hormones, I have listed about this 9 hormones which are
Yes, sir.
classified as proper hormones in the plant.
Sir will be answering all our questions, and we will be coming up with more thoughts about the plant hormones. So, I'd like to thank sir, and we'll be welcoming him again for the second part of this lecture. Thank you, Dr. Ashish Nandi. Thank you.
You're welcome.